Okay, do you need a moment to breathe, or are you feeling completely
I'm
completely
jazzed to talk to you again. It's been too
okay?
long.
You're sufficiently caffeinated, and yeah,
No, but that's okay. I have my
getting
coffee
there.
here.
And feel free to slurp on coffee as and when required. Okay, let's do this. So you're recording on your phone.
Yes.
I am recording on QuickTime. We're good to go. Hi, Peggy. Wonderful to see you, and thank you so much for joining me on Sowing the Seeds of Change.
Hi, Roz. It's been too long. I'm so glad that you invited me onto this podcast. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to get going.
Yeah, me too. It's been, 4 years since we were hanging out together in Shanghai. And then I've seen you in London since then. But yeah, it does feel like it's been a while since we had the chance to put the world to rights.
Well, we're constantly putting the world to right, I think. So we'll explore how we can put the world to right in this podcast, I think.
That is what we're all about here. So I'd like to start off by inviting you to share your favorite quote.
Well, I have a lot of favorite quotes that I sort of journal over time. But most recently, I heard a woman named Marina Jacobi say something that I thought was so appropriate to what I teach now, which is how to change the world. And she said that emotions are simply your perception of reality. Emotions are your perception of reality. And so I think that for me, my fundamental belief is that all realities are possible for us. It's just that some may be more probable at this moment. But through shaping our emotions, mastering our emotions, we can shape the way that we perceive the world, and that becomes our world. So I love that quote.
You're speaking my language. It sounds like another way of saying, as above, so below, as within, so without, that the change starts here. Is that what you're getting at?
Well, that is actually a really great quote to talk about one of the classes that I'm giving with a man named Brian Baruch, Brian the Healer, and that is creating the future with your future self. And we talk a little bit about how the outside world is really just a reflection. It's like fractal reflection of what is going on inside. And I think that a lot of us are creating inside with violence, with adrenaline. We're pushing through, we're repressing a lot of things and then just pushing through like a bulldozer. We're reverbing, and that causes a lot of friction instead of flow. It causes a lot of dissonance instead of harmony. And so because the way that we look at the outside world becomes our outside world, imagine if all of us are acting with combustion. That is our outside world today. So what your quote that you just said is really a great way to summarize what is within becomes our without. Another way to say it.
I really want to highlight here how much I appreciate this about you, Peggy, the way that you have I was going to say so many feet in so many different worlds, but that doesn't sound quite right. You straddle so many polarities, like
Yes.
East and West.
Oh, yes.
Your Western background, engineering at MIT, McKinsey, that very sort of Western, very mind, very yang kind of world. But then also your life in China, your very spiritual approach to life, your powerful intuition. It really feels like you have this broad spectrum, this ability to really include and transcend those polarities.
I think I'm trying to translate as a bridge. I think that I realized very early on, as somebody who was the first person born in my family in the US, to a very Chinese immigrant family, that one of my best roles is to be a cultural bridge. And I think that when you talk about polarities, there's so many different type of bridging that we need to do in order to bring the world together in harmony, so that we can play jazz, so we can sing in choral choir form versus just sort of a pounding marching band, right? And so I think that people who are sort of natural musicians in the way that they talk, the way that they carry themselves, I don't mean literally just playing music, but feeling the world, actually sensing the world as different notes, as different harmonies, really are natural translators, natural bridges to bring worlds together, to bring polarities together, so that, you know, in, I guess, the spiritual world, we could say we're more all one in this lifetime. And I'm hoping that, you know, the world peace that we're all aiming for really comes ultimately from a realization by the masses that it's really just about aligning our energies a little bit more versus a lot of misalignment that creates chop, right? Or worse, just cancels our energy waves out completely, right? So if we're all aligned, we're all going in the same direction, we're all going in the same frequency, the same resonance, we're feeling each other, we're sensing each other so that we don't cause friction, then we're all in flow. And to me, that is the definition of peace.
So I might be projecting my own perspective onto you, so please feel free to correct me here. But it feels like what you're pointing to there is like a unity consciousness, a recognition of what Charles Eisenstein might call the story of interbeing, that everything is connected in this world. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying?
I mean, I think spiritualists would say everything is one. We came from one. We are all one. We're all connected. You know, I'm, as you said, an MIT electrical engineer, computer science trained person. So I tend to look at things as energy waves. And I find that that's an easier way to explain the nature of reality, because people can understand that energy just transmutes from one form to another. And so when I say all realities, all infinite realities, not only are possible, but they exist right now. It's just that some are more possible. What I mean is that a lot of them are just sitting in potential energy form. And then when you put your energy, your thought, your intention, your directional energy into something, then you can actually make that transform into kinetic energy. You can move it. You can start to create, you know, a weightiness to that reality. So when I talk about how to move the world from one shape, one form, one state to another, one reality to another, I usually start there. And I usually start, Raz, you know, I practice Qigong. So I usually demonstrate to people physically when I'm with them that you can actually feel that we're all one without touching somebody. You can actually feel the energy field between two people. And I do this all over the world, and 100% of people can feel it. So it's not something like I have to be there. You could do it at home. You can just sit there and sort of, you know, not think about it. You're not supposed to think about it. You're supposed to sense it with every single cell in your body, your DNA. It's like an antennae, right, to energy. And so I usually find that starting off with something very practical, like waveforms, like ocean waves. Everybody's swum in the ocean before, hopefully.
Or rode on the ocean.
Podcast. If you're listening to Roz and you haven't been in an ocean before, you know, jump in the ocean and go row a boat.
So when you talk about this infinitely, the infinite number of potential futures, and almost in this quantum realm of how do we choose a more optimal future than maybe just sort of blundering on regardless, what do you think needs to happen there? Is this an individual exercise or a collective exercise? How do we try and get ourselves on course for a better future. And I'm saying that particularly with bad news coming out just yesterday about rising temperatures around the world, more days over 40 degrees centigrade and 50 degrees centigrade. It can seem like at the moment we're heading pretty much 180 degrees in the wrong direction. So how do we make this switch?
So again, we have to remember that the outside world is just a reflection of our inside world, right? So if we have friction within, then there's going to be friction without. So I encourage people to start looking within more and find those tools to understand how to be at peace. And I'll share some of those more practical exercises with you now. But
that would be great.
I think a lot of people call that manifestation, law of attraction, whatever words you want to call it today. I think, Roz, you sat in on my quantum manifestation class before COVID started. So that is literally what does reality look like and how do you actually jump from one reality to another? It's more quantum physics, it's Qigong. And it's something that is very easy to understand. As I said, once you open the doors of your mind, just feeling this energy field that connects all of us. I think what is harder and more unique to what I teach is how do you collectively do this as a society? So as you know, I've been working in China since 2007 as an environmentalist, really 2006 as an environmentalist. And I've had I'm not going to say good fortune. I mean, it was a lot of work, but I've had the success of being able to catalyze China-wide changes across 1.45 billion people 7 times over. These are things that are irrevocable changes. They'll never return back to the old state. It's like revolutionizing the electrical grid, introducing smart grid. The national slogan, China Dream. Things like that are fundamentally different realities for a group of people that consists of 1.45 billion people. So what I'm doing,
group of people.
You know, it's one of those large numbers that you almost can't really understand unless you're on the ground in China. You really just can't understand it. It's like understanding what 38 Celsius, 40 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Celsius. Like when you say that, honestly, I can't really understand because most of us sort of grew up in a slightly air conditioned, way of being. I hate to say that. But I honestly can't even wrap my head around what 40 degree, much less 50 degrees Celsius. What does that really mean? Like, I can't do that unless I experience it. So I think the interesting thing, the more unique thing that I teach is based on my experience having moved the state of a reality for a large group of people. Now I can look back and I combine that with some of my more spiritual practices. And I look at my MIT engineering training, my McKinsey consulting hat, my VC spreadsheet hat, and I'm able to bridge all of that into a framework which I call tornado leadership. And what I'm going to say is quite surprising to me, which is that everything that I learned early on, all the successes that I had in my career really didn't help me do these changes, make these shifts at China scale. A lot of what I know now took a journey for me internally to change from being really smart and working really hard, thinking in my head, learning how to do spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations and that stuff.
I have some familiarity, yeah.
As a finance person, you know what I mean, right? I literally had to drop business plans. I needed to, instead of think about how to get somewhere and plan how to get somewhere, I needed to surrender to the energetics of a tornado. You can't control the path of a tornado. And instead of speaking in numbers numb, as my friend Sky says.
I like
so
that.
Brilliantly, numbers numb. instead I had to really learn to speak with my heart. And I have to say, as stereotypical Chinese daughter of a tiger mom, that was really hard to do, because the Chinese culture doesn't really grow up saying, I love you to your children. You don't really give hugs. It's not a really emotionally expressive culture. And so it was a big struggle for me over the last decade plus to start expressing myself with emotions and love. I used to, believe it or not, want to be a robot. Like, that was my goal. I went to MIT, I wrote about Isaac Asimov, the foundation, and I just thought that would be the most efficient way to live. It sounds really funny now, right?
There are quite a few guys in Silicon Valley who seem to still want to be robots.
Yeah. And, while I, a large part of my career was working on cutting edge technology, I started one of literally the earliest e-commerce companies in Silicon Valley. I was the product manager for the first software product that allowed you to surf the internet with a graphical user interface. I don't even think young people can understand the internet without, drag and drop in Windows, but instead text and command prompts. So a large part of my life was about creating technologies, bringing them forth to the masses to make life more efficient. And now I realize that you can be really smart and learn how to have incremental progress, right? 1 + 1 = 2. You can work and live in Silicon Valley, and you can do the whole Moore's law. You can talk about exponential growth. And for a long time, I lived that. 1 + 1 = 3. But now what I'm teaching people is, if you want to move whole societies to a different reality, you need to do that at quantum speed. And that takes 1 + 1 = 11. And it takes the vortex of the tornado, allowing you to literally jump through that and landing in a different state, a different country. Like, literally, I'm in Kansas, right?
Like
or wherever
Dorothy.
Dorothy went.
Yeah.
Dorothy started in Kansas and then went to Oz, right? So this is possible for anybody to do, and anybody can be a tornado leader. There is an architecture, there is an algorithm. Again, I tend to fall back on my engineering background to explain how to do this. But to do it, you need to have the internal inner work, the internal journey of moving from speaking to your head and to other people's heads, to speaking with your heart and to other people's hearts. And you need to be able to let go of spreadsheets and plans completely.
Yes. My language around that is that the universe needs some space to kind of work its magic, and Excel spreadsheets don't give it that sort of space. Like, they're too reductionist, too left-brained, and in this quantum realm, it's a very different way of thinking. And this brings me on to my next question. So I get the tornado and this sort of like energy vortex, but the other word in that is tornado leadership. And my sort of mental model for this is thinking back to my ocean rowing years, where I'd never really seen myself as a leader, but I did notice that because I had this very clear vision of what I was doing, row across 3 oceans, and why, to raise environmental awareness, that it sort of created this vortex of energy that drew in the most amazing people who just showed up and wanted to support that vision to enable it to come true. But it needed that real clarity. And what I'm wondering is, when we're talking about the collective here, if we want to go somewhere together and in that really synergistic way where the whole becomes greater than some of the parts, how do we get a sufficient number of people to align around a shared vision? Because human nature, it does seem like if we all woke up exactly the same one morning, by lunchtime we would have found something to disagree about. Like, how on earth do we manage to get people, first of all, is it important that we have a shared vision of the future? And if so, how do we arrive at that? Or maybe it's not important. Maybe you all just jump into the tornado and we're all flying around and the universe takes us to Oz.
Well, first of all, I just want to say every single time I think about you rowing 3 oceans in that boat, first of all, I just can't even put myself into your position, but I keep remembering your story. I asked you this question about how do you eat, right? What are you eating? And you said you carried sprout seeds and you ate a lot of sprouts. And so I now eat a lot of sprouts. And every single time I look at that, I'm like, this seed carried life for Roz. It sustained her. And I keep thinking about how foods are not just there to feast on, but they're living, they're life force. And so I want to thank you for sharing that little story.
Well, I love it that you brought that up, seeing as this podcast is called Sowing the Seeds of Change. That feels entirely appropriate. So thank you.
So I'm going to break down the architecture, the algorithm of how to change reality for yourself and then for a collective. It's actually quite simple. And
that would be fabulous.
Yeah.
How to change reality in 5 simple steps.
Yeah, maybe 7. But it really is simple. And what's clear to me is that I need to get this message to as many youth as possible because they understand it. When I say this, they intuitively, I'm going to say, remember that this is true. Whereas a lot of older people, especially people who are used to spreadsheets, speaking with their heads more than their hearts, societal beliefs and stereotypes and all the things that we've learned in education end up encrusting us in inertia rather than letting us let loose like the tornado, because the tornado really is about energetics, momentum, angular momentum. It's a force, it's a life force. And that's why spreadsheets will never get you quantum speed manifestation change, because they are static, right? They're static. They have no momentum in them. So the first thing that I will say, if we relate this back to your clear vision, the first thing to create the future you want, to be able to bring forth that better future faster, is to see that future in every little detail. And I liken this to James Cameron when he spent 10 years really understanding what the world in the Avatar world looked like, from what the beings dressed like, what they ate, what songs they sang, where they slept, how they made love, how they made war. So you need to step into the future Roz, right? So you, before the 3 journeys or before each journey, had to visualize for people that you have already succeeded. And what does that look like, right? What does that path look like forward? And so when we worked with Chinese people all over different societies, the key opinion leaders, the key influencers, we brought 25 of them together at a time. And we literally had blank pieces of paper with different questions, trying to get them to draw, even in stick figures, what does that future look like for China? What is the new version of prosperity that happens to embed harmony with nature in this vision? And we asked a series of questions, which we've also articulated on a website, which you can link to, but it's facebook.com/my www.limitless.imagination. And
Beautiful.
there you will find, I think it's 13 questions that we asked people that came together with 2 Pakistani think tanks on Pakistani Independence Day a couple years ago. We led a workshop for them to reimagine the Pakistani dream for 2047 on Pakistani Independence Day. And we asked these questions so that they can start to sense the energetic fingerprint of that future reality. Does that make sense? In urban planning, we might call that sense of place, but it's place plus time, right? It's a whole nother reality. And so the smells, the songs, the way that you dance with people, how do you interact, the elders and the children, how do they interact? What does a food feast look like, taste like? Those are part of an energetic fingerprint, or in sort of engineering terms, it would be a mathematical calculation of energetic waveforms into a very unique energetic field. That is the definition of reality in a time space. And so what we first want to do is immerse ourselves so that when you describe it, people can almost feel like they're jumping into it and living it. Like in the Avatar movie, the protagonist literally put on his glasses and felt like he was in that reality. The second step is harder for people like me who really had emotions repressed. You know, when I was younger, my tiger mom used to tell me not to cry. When I was, frustrated with something, when I was studying to the point of breaking, she would say, don't cry. Almost like a guy would tell their son, suck it up, be a man, right? Yeah. So for people like us, it's really important to hear the second step. And that is that everything in the universe is simply energy waves working in harmony. And certain frequencies are kill frequencies for organisms, like algae. Right now, there's sound waves and technologies where you use sound waves to kill algae in water. That's a kill frequency. But there's also a creation frequency. That creation frequency is, as you suspect, a high soprano-like frequency that embodies the emotion, the energy in motion of that euphoria, of that time where you first sense that you exist. It's that marvel that you feel just existing. Maybe it's the euphoria and the ecstasy of being in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory the first time, or stepping into Disneyland for the first time. For a parent, you might resonate with this story. A couple years ago, well, not quite a couple years ago, my nephew was born. And my children are 16 and 18, so I don't totally remember exactly this feeling, but my nephew, when he was born, I rushed over like a bat, out of hell to the hospital. And I was able to hold Jonathan in my hands, facing me, and he hadn't quite yet opened his eyes. And so I was just looking at him, marveling. And then all of a sudden, that first moment when the baby starts to flutter its eyes open, it happened when I was holding him. And the eyes are sort of gray blue, even though he's Chinese, so he's going to eventually turn brown, but it's sort of this alien gray blue to a Chinese person, at least. And he's fluttering and it's sort of unfocused. But then all of a sudden there's that moment when he focuses on you and he realizes, oh my God, I exist and there's something that isn't me that also exists. And it's that sense of wonder that you want to capture when you are describing that future that already exists at this moment. And you want to combine that with the feeling of satisfaction that you've already achieved that future, that you've already jumped into that future. If you can retain that sense of wonder, that marvel, that ecstasy, that euphoria, and that satisfaction for a minute and drop it, that's a practice that everybody can do. So that's really one of the main algorithms.
Okay, so we're not going to be able to remember that, or most of us are not going to be able to remember that moment of being a newborn and actually going, wow, gosh, I've just incarnated, how cool. So this is like an imagining of almost like that rebirth then, is it, into this new vision?
Well, I mean, you don't have to take it necessarily that literally. It could be literally, you know, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I'm imagining myself, if I got that golden ticket, what it would have been like to open the doors and walk into that factory. Most people can remember going to Disneyland the first time, right? Or for me, another one of those sensations was walking into an orchid garden. I believe it was in Hawaii, where there was just like every type of orchid possible in a very dense place. And for me, orchids are very sentimental because my mother and my grandmother were in love and grew tons of orchids. So it's very sentimental. It's an early childhood moment. But then now you have, I don't know, thousands of orchids all in one space, and you're walking through this wonderland. It's the same. That's why Avatar became the #1 selling movie of all time. Right? Because he captured that wonder.
Exactly. So it's that sense of awe and wonder, like in a very sort of almost sacred sense. That's what's happening.
Did you ever watch Cosmos with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, the movie, Carl Sagan?
Is that what it was called? I remember the movie Contact. That's what.
Contact. Sorry, yeah. I forget what. Yeah, Contact. So yeah. In Contact, there's this moment where Jodie Foster is going through the wormhole, and the chair shakes and then lets loose, right? And she's floating in the little spaceship. And she's going through this wormhole, and she literally is crying tears of wonder and joy. And she says it's like poetry. That reality is like poetry. It's that level of emotion that you want to try and capture when you are expressing what this state of reality, this future that already exists, looks like. That's part 1 of the algorithm.
Okay, I'm going to come right back to the algorithm, but just want to take a short break while I ask you one of my questions that I ask all of my guests. So I somehow have the feeling you're not going to struggle with this one. Peggy, if you were democratically elected Queen of the world for a day, what would your first decree be?
Or king. I could be king too, no worries. I love the TV show The Magicians, where there's this woman, this girl, and she's crowned the king. I was like, oh, that's very PC.
That's perfect. We had a male guest who wanted to be queen, so yes, we are a broad church here.
But that's almost like more normal these days for a guy to ask to be a queen than for a girl to ask to be a king. You know, for me, I have been an environmentalist in this part of my career since 2006. And it was quite a shock for me to learn, as part of my work as a board member of Drawdown, which is a framework for what are the biggest contributors to climate change emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. And it was a shock for me to learn that if I'm going to really solve this issue for the world, solar and wind are not enough. And actually, food education, reducing food waste, eating a rainbow every day, those are the things that are going to make the biggest change, because food systems, the way that we grow harvest, eat, dispose of food causes 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And so David Nabarro, when he was the special envoy to the UN for the SDGs, now he's at WHO. David Nabarro said several times to me that, and he was an advisor to the EAT Forum along with me. So I recorded him saying at the UN and at many other forums that actually food education is the single solution, the single intervention that actually achieves all 17 global goals. And it's really cheap to do. Education is a really cheap technology, quote unquote, to enact. And if you teach it to kids young enough before their dietary habits have been set, so around kindergarten, first grade or so, then you can use games to teach them about all the beautiful colors of carrots, all the beautiful colors of beets, all the beautiful colors, varieties of tomatoes, and how wondrous the plant world is. And that eating a rainbow every day is really, you know, where you're going to get the pot of gold, how you're going to get the pot of gold. And that making food, well, this might be for a little bit older people, but making food is making love. So sharing food is sharing love, ultimately. Mm-hmm. And we talk about how every part of nature can be reborn. So we teach worm composting. You can see a Discovery Channel piece that ran all December, last December in Asia, that showed our little kids holding the worms in their hands and marveling at the worms, that they can eat the food and poo out black gold. So food education is what I would decree as something that every single kid and their parent should go through with, you know, the beautiful Food Heroes educational curriculum that we created at Juice. It's filled with cartoons, you know, 5 cartoon kids and an elder. We have 33 lessons. We use them on primetime TV and Super Nanny. We use them in arcade booths in malls with Peppa Pig. We use them on board games and flashcards. So I think that is probably the single most important thing that we could be doing. If we put no money anywhere else, if we simply just had everybody have an emotional connection to food, understanding that food is a living, breathing organism, why would anybody then choose something that was wrapped like a mummy in a coffin versus a living, breathing food, right? That made us feel more alive.
I love that vision. So it's about food education, eating the rainbow, and making love via food, kind of.
Sharing food is sharing love. That might be more appropriate.
Less ambiguous, yeah. Thank you for that. So back to the algorithm of how to change the world. So we've got the shared vision, we've got the that creative frequency. Is it as simple as that, or are there more steps to the algorithm?
Well, it turns out reality has multiple dimensions of nuanced, meanings and oomph, that juice, right? And so one of the issues I find in this world that causes polarity is when we look at things very flat, it's very difficult when you don't see the true dimensions, the true multiple layers of meaning when you talk about something. Then there's less surface area to come together and put that shared table on to collaborate with. Does that make sense? And so the tornado, one of the other layers of jumping through this tornado is understanding the ability to spin the tornado, to increase the angular momentum of the tornado. This is different than linear momentum, right? Just pushing something, push something forward. I'm going to use my adrenaline. I'm going to use my hard work, my willpower to just keep pushing through a problem. That's like linear momentum. That's only going to get you incremental, maybe exponential change. But to really jump through a wormhole, it looks like a vortex, the shape of a tornado. And so you need to spin the tornado and you need to expand the size of the tornado, right? And so one way to do that in a practical way, the way that I was able to achieve a lot of catalytic success in China across the country, is learning how to do micro asks. And so that means drawing people into the tornado by making micro asks that they can say yes to. Not sharing this huge vision and saying, will you jump on board with me full time? Will you give me $1 million, $10 million? But instead ask them for just a little bit of their time that they would love to say yes to. So micro asks is one way to spin the tornado. Another way to spin the tornado is micro celebrations. And so I used to tell my teams at Juice, who are mostly volunteer people drawn into the tornado, magnetized into the power of the tornado. I used to joke that if you didn't take a picture of it, it didn't exist. It didn't happen. And so one way to get people energized, magnetized, drawn into the tornado is to increase the weight, the energy, the density of the energy field by creating an energy waveform, which is visual, which is photos or video. Does that make sense? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a dense, packly dense, sort of like a 500 thread count Egyptian bed sheet of an energetic field, which is the energetic fingerprint of that reality. And by drawing in people, you borrow on the energy field of a person by taking a picture of something happening that creates more energy waves to weave into this, thread count, high thread count reality, by using song, by increasing the levels of harmony. So for example, pop songs now have a maximum of 5 levels of harmony, right? But you can imagine something like jazz that has like a whole bunch more, maybe 20 layers of harmony. In fact, you don't even play the melody, you just play around the melody invisibly, creatively, right? So each harmony is a different energy wave form that weaves in to pack into this dense field, this dense blanket, right, of this energy field, which makes up this reality. So micro asks and micro celebrations. So I talked a lot about magnetizing people into this tornado. So you can imagine if you were a tornado watcher, right? Or maybe you're not a tornado watcher, you're just a citizen in Kansas, and this tornado comes pummeling through your land, right? Your emotions are going to create your reality, remember. So you might look at this tornado with fear because you've watched enough news to see whole towns flattened. And so you might run in the opposite direction. Or you might be a tornado watcher and you all of a sudden get this adrenaline, this excitement, this anticipation that you're going to be able to capture this amazing video of this super tornado, right? And so with that anticipation, you get drawn in to this tornado. So it's a little bit similar with creating realities. So if you use your senses to describe things as energetics, it makes a lot more sense how you can just jump into a tornado and just transform the landscape very quickly. Now, when you get very close to this tornado, if you're not going at the same direction with the same angular momentum, then you will just be sort of thrown off to the side, right? But if you're close enough, then you will get drawn in. And if you become aligned with the vision, right, the energy that, let's say, Ra is at the center of the tornado is using to express this vision of having crossed 3 oceans and affected people's hearts and minds about the oceans, then you become a particle in the tornado. Now, how do you draw people in at the same vibration, the same angular momentum, this tornado? It's through this frequency that we talked about, this ecstasy, this sense of marvel that you describe this reality. And what happens is, from a neuroscience point of view, from a behavioral point of view. 95% of all of people's actions are actually subconscious. They do what they do because they love to do that, and they feel a sense of love, the sense of loving connection. And then 95% of their time, sleeping or awake, you're thinking, how do I row faster? How do I make sure that I am fed through the journey? Or how do I help Roz make sure she raises enough money for the boats or the team? How do I help Roz get more media coverage for this beautiful thing? How do I get governments to listen to the important message that she's sharing? So I may not be Roz at the center of the tornado. I'm a particle in the tornado, but I'm drawn in subconsciously. Subconsciously, I help you create your future. And that is why ultimately you don't need business plans. You don't need to know how to get somewhere. It just happens. It's the power of all of us collectively jumping through this tornado, making it bigger, and then landing in Oz from Kansas.
That feels very relevant to my work in a decentralized organization of seeds. And it also reminds me very much of the statement of the Hopi elders about the river of change is flowing now very fast. And the people who cling to the shore are the ones who are going to suffer, because they're going to be feeling like ripped in half because they're trying to hang on with their hands while the current is pulling at the rest of their bodies. And it's the people who let go of the shore and allow themselves to be swept into the fast flowing current down the middle of the river channel. And they look around to see who else is there in the middle of the swirling waters with them. They're the ones who are going to be able to really embrace that future. So yeah, whether we're all flying around in a tornado or bobbing around in this fast flowing river, it feels like that same energy of surrender to something, this momentum of change that is going to happen anyway. And we can either like cling on to the old and suffer accordingly, or we can let go of the old and allow this dramatic, ever increasing momentum to take us where it will. So I guess we could do it the hard way.
It's really about flow and friction. So I definitely used to use the flowing down the river analogy to talk about boulders in the middle of the river, right? So a lot of people who are like me, environmentalists, sometimes they think about an obstacle in the system and they organize protests against it. That's a little bit like being a battering ram against a boulder in the middle of a river, right? You cause friction unnecessarily. Because really what you need to do only and simply is to flow. Because if you flow, then you will just go around the boulder. You don't even need to sense the boulder. You just naturally go around it, right? Water, you never see a stream of water just like constantly hitting their head, so to speak, their drop against an existing boulder in the middle of the stream. So that is a really good analogy for flow versus friction. Right. Again, the secret to everything is flow versus friction. It's alignment versus misalignment. It's harmony versus dissonance. But the reason why I moved from river, which is linear, to tornado is because actually the nature of reality, the way of creating new realities, the way of creation, the shape of creation is actually a torus. So it's like a donut. Mm-hmm. For people who like desserts. And when you create, when you breathe out, right, then it's in the shape of a spiral tornado up from the center of the donut, the torus, around the sides and back into unity. So white hole creation, black hole, coming back into unity. So everything exists in is possible within that center of the torus. So everything in reality is just a series of toruses that join together to create bigger toruses. So, but the beginning of that energy, the creation, is the shape of a tornado. So that is why now I talk about tornado leadership as the analogy to explain the nuance of the work that I've done in the past, and now how I'm working with other communities like the State of the Nation of Hawaii to take these secrets and to sort of cut the cords of the sandbags that let the hot air balloon float and soar into the sky.
It also feels, to my interpretation of it, like the difference between yin and yang, and you're much better placed than I am to evaluate this or to apply it to that image, that dynamic of ramrodding through and hitting your head, your stream against the boulder, feels like that white knuckled yang. No, I'm going to do it this way. Whereas the dynamic that you're describing, and the spiral is a very yin kind of a shape. It feels more like that yin receptivity rather than that yang determination. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I some people, when they flatten yin and yang, they tend to flatten it to genders, like females versus male. When they talk about divine feminine, divine masculine, they tend to flatten it to a gender. And I want to make sure that this isn't about gender. It's not about moving from just patriarchy to matriarchy or something like that. It's really about soft flow versus, as you say, ramming friction. It's really about friction and flow. It's about, and so if you say energy waves and alignment and misalignment, it's a little bit more neutral. You can engage with this idea and you can be compassionate for people who are in friction, but you can also observe it much more neutrally. And I think that is, for me in my spiritual practice, that's very important, to practice engaged, compassionate neutrality. So yin and yang both are necessary in creation, right? It's not about necessarily, I think you said very early on in our chat, is it about everybody looking alike? Even if we looked alike by lunch, we would have different ideas. Chinese and maybe other Asian cultures, I can't speak for all Asian cultures, but Chinese society is not about everybody looking uniform. Although from an outside point of view, I think a lot of people think that, they're like, oh, all, Chinese girls look alike, haha, or, oh, it's an authoritative, dictatorship, which, by the way, it's not. It's more like a multinational corporation, the way China's run. But it's really not about uniformity. It's about harmony in society, right? And so yin and yang, it's about this, and it's not this sort of static, yin and yang picture. It's again, the torus. It's about coming in and out, in and out. It's like sex, right? Sex is divine creation if you do it right. It's about the breath, ha, right? It's breathing out, creating, and then coming back in, right? So it's a little bit like you want to know more about yourself, and this is the act of creation. So you're creating all different versions of yourself, and that is me, that is Roz, that is, Joe, that is Jane, right? And you let them out into the universe to use their own free will of choice to experiment, to experience creation. But then we want to come back to the water cooler and share stories of ourselves, right? So all of life is out and in, right? That is what I view as yin and yang in divine creation. It's having sex with each other. It's a movement. It's a pulse, really. right? It's the pull.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for that. So just going to take a quick break so that I can ask you my second or my next standard question. Peggy, what was the last time that you did something for the first time, and what was it?
Oh, this one was really hard to answer. I had two things that I did this week. One was, I'm trying to use up my friend's pantry and cook everything in it. And we're on this low carb diet. And they had bought these boxes of hearts of palm pasta in pasta shape, like spaghetti, but made out of hearts of palm. Now, as an environmentalist, I do not agree with eating too many hearts of palm, but I have to say it tasted like al dente pasta. So I made this like arrabbiata pasta that tasted really, really good. It had a lot of bite to it. And I would eat that all the time, other than being an environmentalist and feeling a little bit guilty of hearts of palm. The second thing that I did this week, that was the first time, was I'm not really into professional sports. That I don't know much about professional sports. I couldn't tell you, too many football teams or basketball teams or what. I don't even really know how the game is played. I couldn't tell you how many people were on the teams. But I had the good fortune of meeting a former captain of the LA Lakers who won 3 world champions. And so I talked to him like briefly about basketball. So I got to learn a little bit about, I don't remember what, because now I can't even remember what position he said he was. Small, I'm forward or something. I can't even remember, but it was the first time. And so it'll probably take 3 times for me to understand the game of basketball.
So when you say you talked basketball, it sounds a bit more like you listened basketball.
I asked the questions that from a naive point of view, like somebody who just really didn't know the game, like what position did you play? Like I knew enough to ask that question, but then when he answered, it was a little bit like being in Japan or like a foreign country where you don't speak the language and you're saying like, how do I find a bathroom? And then they speak back to you in Japanese or Spanish and you don't really know what they're saying. So I knew how to ask some questions. I think what was, interesting was talking to him about flow. Like what kind of state of flow? How did he use only his senses and not his mind to be able to, like, I know enough to say slam dunk, no, that's about it. But like, how do you actually be in the flow to be, I'm pretty sure I know that the Lakers are one of the great teams of all time and 3 world champions. Obviously he's a great basketball player. So clearly he was not thinking his way through. He was sensing his way through. And so we had some really great conversations about my Qigong practice. I actually showed him, I demonstrated the energy between our hands without touching each other, right? So that, he can start to understand the energetic fundamentals that I teach about how to change the world and how to actually, I was talking about how do you create with your future self to be able to be a creator. What I'm talking about, part of the algorithm is to create with your whole self and your true self. Your whole self is your inner child, the now and the future self. And your true self is how much of your creative decisions that you make today are not influenced by other people unduly.
Wow, that is a big question.
That's my question for you. That's my question for you, Roz. So of your creative decisions that you make today, how much do you think, are you really making that decision based on your own energetic fingerprint, your own free will choices versus society is saying, oh, you're this short blonde and you shouldn't be athletic. You shouldn't be able to row across an ocean, much less 3. Or you're a certain age and you're not supposed to go out dancing till 3 a.m. in a club, or whatever it is. I'm sort of being flippant, but how much, I call this the karmic score. How much are you really creating from your own karma versus being polluted by other people's karma?
It's a really beautiful question and exploration. And of course, it's difficult to tell how deep our enculturation goes, because from the moment that we're born, we're being shaped by the culture that we live in and the people around us. But my subjective sense is that as I get older, and let's agree that 53 is a fabulous age to be.
It's an amazing age.
I've never been happier. I get better and better at tuning into what feels right for me, to sensing into that, am I a yes, a no, a maybe, to generating options. Yeah, I like that saying that we may not have free will, but we have free won't. So when we're presented with ideas and alternatives, even if those are generated from within our own mind, we can then go to our heart, to our gut, to our intuition, to go, how am I feeling about this? And I was brought up in a family and a culture and a country that is very cognitive, very head oriented. Over the course of my life, I can't tell you how many Excel spreadsheets I've done, actually called options, like whether it's options for a vacation or options for a piece of equipment for my boat or whatever. Spreadsheets used to be how I made my decisions, and there's still a time and a place for spreadsheets. Certain decisions call for a nice, neat, boxy kind of an evaluation of them. But on the really big, important decisions, I have got so much better at tuning, not just tuning into my intuition, but then actually trusting the answer that it gives me. And I don't know if this is something that comes with age or if it's actually something, I expect it's something that could be taught much younger. And I have no regrets about the way that my life has turned out, because like I say, it's all good now. But I do sometimes wonder, wow, if I'd have learned this life skill earlier on, things would have turned out very differently. And there's really no way of knowing the answer to this philosophical question. But I do wonder if we are all tuning in more and more to our intuition, if the universe, or however you call the source or spirit or God or whatever you want to call it, if we are all actually being activated to be our own unique expression, rather than conforming to what society, what boxes it wants to put us into according to what kind of education we had, or what we look like, or what gender we are, or whatever. I would love to see the world in which, no matter what somebody's gifts are, if they can make a livelihood out of that, if they could be supported in that and really be able to bring what they have, because the world needs all of that diversity right now. We don't need large groups of people all thinking the same way or responding to the same incentives and the same prompts and triggers. We need all of us bringing all that we are. I think I went off on quite a tangent there, but I enjoyed that little philosophical diversion. So thank you for a beautiful question.
It's really not a tangent, because again, everything in terms of how do you bring in a better future faster is about everybody, as many particles that are diverse working in harmony together, going sort of in the same direction, but being different, right? That's harmony, not uniformity. And if we're not our true selves, then we're playing by somebody else's beat we're listening to somebody else's beat. And when every single beat is the same, then you get progression, you get marching drum, you get maybe like the beat of rap, right? But again, when you truly create life, it's about moving to harmonies. It's about being jazz. It's about being a chorus. And so my job right now with one of my creative partners, Brian Baruch, Brian the Healer, he's known as, is to help people be their true selves. So, and Roz, I think I'm going to introduce you to Brian as well, because we now give people a karmic score to see, are you you? And so there was one person that we're working with recently that was working at, for example, 87%. Another person was working at 30%, which is a really, really bad score, let me just say, not good. So what does that mean, and how do we do that? It means, like, early on when I was younger, I had the limiting beliefs of society to tell me that I needed to work my ass off, not have any fun, sacrifice any playtime to get into a good school so that I could get a good job and earn enough money to be successful, to survive and thrive. And this limited a lot of choices in my life. I'm not sure I would have made a different choice. I mean, I think I still would have gone to MIT and studied electrical engineering and computer science, but a lot of my other choices in life, I sort of felt like I was very flat. I didn't have a lot of dimension to me. Now I have a lot more dimensions, a lot more layers that I've explored experientially for me. So it's interesting that Brian the Healer, what he does when we work with people or key influencers in the world, people who we think can catalyze great good in the world, or we work with communities like the state of the nation of Hawaii, what we do is we start by scanning the energy of somebody. Some people might call this auric colors, because he can see this in shades of pink or purple or green or blue or red or orange or brown, and in every spectrum in between. And everybody has our own unique energetic fingerprint. As I said before, a reality has its own unique sense of place, a mathematical calculation of energy waves together, a sense of reality. And so that corresponds to a color, because colors are visible frequencies, right? Just like sound is a frequency. So you are probably a very, very light shade of pink, I'm going to guess Brian would say. But you might have your energetic field polluted by men, blue, green, purple, brown, who want something from you, want your recognition, or want to suck on your vitality, be your entourage, and they're polluting you in blue. So light pink and blue is, I don't know, some form of like lavender, right? But you might have, I don't know, trauma from a family member an elder female who's really anxious or fatigued, a little bit, lonely, maybe orange, dark orange, brown, right? And so if you add that to your pink, that becomes a watercolor that is like muddied, brownish champagne, right? So by looking at that initial MRI scan of what you look like now versus your true color, you can actually give yourself a karmic score of how much are you creating with you? What in you is natural to you versus not natural to you? And what we do in healing is remove the colors that are not natural to you, the energy that is not natural to you. And it's a little bit like energetic calluses that you're scraping off, like an archaeological dig, till you get to you. Now, because there's no time, there's no space, and all realities exist in this now moment, some of those energetic calluses are ancestral trauma. You can imagine Chinese people going through a lot of trauma in the last 50 years to hundreds of years to centuries. Jewish people, Holocaust, indigenous people, right? Colonialism. This is all ancestral baggage that we need to scrape off, clear, and just get out of our system. And that allows us to flow like the river, and remove friction so that we can create from our true selves. And that is yet another nuanced layer of the tornado of how to heal ourselves And then through healing ourselves, healing our communities, and healing our worlds.
Oh, that's deep and important work, because when we still carry those wounds and those traumas, then anything that we manifest in the world is affected by that. So that question, are you you? That has so many layers to it, and that feels
so many layers.
Feels like a beautiful place to stop for now, because I know we could talk probably for the rest of the week given half a chance. Peggy, I want to thank you for being you, and for all of the beauty and the joy and the clarity that you bring to the world. And I feel like I've seen you through a number of different incarnations now, and in a way drilling down through these layers, from the creating very practical, very linear kinds of results, really getting into the deep, beautiful metaphysical layers of how we create change. And that's beautiful to witness, and an amazing and courageous journey that you're taking. So thank you.
Thanks, Roz, for having me. And I can't wait to see you in person again.
I can't wait for that either. We will have a blast. Thank you so much, Peggy.